2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn Joe into DFS pros.
Alright, welcome to the Taco Tuesday PGA DFS podcast presented to you by DFSArmy.com. Go ahead and click on the link in the description if you're on iTunes or YouTube, and come check us out at DFS Army. We've got premium content for every daily fantasy sport there is, and a really good PGA content that we put out. Put out a nice cheat sheet this week for the Open Championship, which I will be referencing here in the podcast. So if you want access to that, the NASCAR, the MLB content, and the Domination Station lineup optimizer, not to mention our group chat, then come on over to DFSArmy.com and on sign up use the promo code TACO to support the pod. Okay, so we're here at the third major championship out of 4 in the season, and this is the Open Championship, also known as the British Open, and it will be taking place in Royal Birkdale in Southport, England. The course is a very old course, and it's been in the rotation for the Open Championship for a very long time, but they only come here about once every 10 years, last time being in 2008, and before that 1998. In 1998 they renovated the course, they dug up all the greens and remade the course entirely, and they removed 6,000 trees from the course, which makes the very windy conditions even worse with no tree cover. And because of that, we've seen extremely high scores. We've seen winners every single time above par. Last time, Padraig Harrington won at 3 strokes over par, and he actually won by 4 strokes. So this is a very difficult golf course, although the fairways are quite flat. It's not like most links-style courses with undulating hills and fairways. These are flatter fairways, but it's extremely troublesome if you miss the fairway. It's extremely hard to scramble, and approach shots are going to be very difficult because of potential windy conditions and winds that swirl around and change directions between each hole or even in the middle of a shot. And if we take a look at the Vegas odds of everyone in the tournament, we can see that Vegas is prepared for a high variance tournament, as the studs like Dustin Johnson and Jordan Spieth are only about 15-1. It's a very high number for the high-end studs, and you really see a lot of high numbers as you go down the field, because it really is anyone's tournament. There's no big favorite, and there's an expected amount of large variance because of the weather and because of the fact that anyone can put up like a quadruple bogey at any time, and that's just commonplace around here. People can get into huge trouble, and it can take anyone out of the tournament like that. And scoring is going to be lower as far as DraftKings scoring goes, and people who make the cut might actually put up negative points. We saw Sean O'Hare make the cut back here in 2008, and he ended up finishing 26 strokes over par. And he wasn't even the worst. There's another guy that finished like 31 strokes over par. So DraftKings points aren't going to be as high. You're not going to see anyone in the hundreds because birdies and eagles are just extremely hard to come by at a tough course like this. And a lot of your high-end guys are going to be these bomber types with a high ball flight, and that is going to be really bad in these swirling winds. It's not like a huge deal, but it's kind of important to note that some of these high-end bombers like J.B. Holmes or Dustin Johnson, they're going to be in a lot of trouble if the winds do pick up, which, as the forecast has it right now, it looks like it'll be about 14, 15 mile-an-hour winds with gusts between 20 and 25 miles per hour on Thursday. And on Friday, we see more of the same, except for at some points the wind gusts go up to 30 miles an hour. So honestly, this is the week to go with guys who avoid bogeys, stay out of trouble, and hit tons of fairways. This is definitely an accuracy course because you'll take a short drive over a long drive in the rough any day. You're gonna absolutely need to find these greens and find these fairways. Your ball striking just has to be on point if you're gonna survive, and it's all about saving par. It's not even about making birdie this week, and eagles are going to be almost impossible with only 2 par 5s. This is a par 70, and one interesting note about the course is all 4 par 3s fall between 175 and 200 yards. But one thing that you're going to find with this week is that since half of the field are European guys, we're not going to have a whole lot of stats to work with. The stats that I keep, I do have a lot of the guys like Stenson, Rory, Peters, or whatever. But as far as the official PGA Tour stats go for the year, they're not going to have guys like that on there, and they're not going to have guys who've only played 1 or 2 events, or guys that are registered to the European Tour like Lee Westwood or Martin Keimer. So my custom field-adjusted statistics are a little bit better to go by this week than a lot of your main stats you see on the PGA Tour website, especially since it's weighted very recently. But again, some of these guys are only going to have 1 to 3 events, and just be mindful of that when looking at the numbers. Know that those sample sizes are small, and I have it listed right next to it on the stats column there. But for this week, we're definitely looking at driving accuracy. That's just very important. We don't want guys who are going to spray it everywhere. It's not going to be good. And greens of regulation, also a very good stat to look at, but I might be a little bit more interested in strokes gained approach, kind of as always. I mean, it's going to be very important to hit these greens, and if they have a low strokes gained approach number, they'd better have a good strokes gained around the green number. If they're bad at both of them, that's a recipe for disaster around here. I'm going to discount putting. I'm not going to consider that very much, and I'm kind of not going to use birdie or better percentage as much either. I'm going to tack on bogey avoidance to the stats column, and you can look at that along with par 3, 175 through 200 on there. But it's not really even a week where you look at statistics too much. It's more of a week where you think about the overall strategy of this tournament. First off, you have a lot more of the public involved. You see huge spikes in numbers whenever it's a major championships, whenever there's a millionaire maker. They're going to stick to the American names a bit more, and then, of course, jump on a few of the hype guys like Tommy Fleetwood because it's a local course and all that, and anyone they see on the big touting sites. So definitely be mindful of ownership. This is absolutely the week to pivot because anyone could fall off the face of the earth like that. There are a lot of plays on the board that seem safe, but do remember course history doesn't really matter because, like I said, the last time we went here was 2008, and that was a long time ago, and I would definitely not consider anything from 1998. So look at 08 a little just in case, and then course history again just a little, 'cause it's sort of like the US Open where it's set up the same at each course, and they kind of pick similar styles of courses. And they like to pick the British link style courses, those Irish courses, stuff like that for the British Open. And there's kind of a common theme with the British Open because you see a lot of people who are older winning compared to the Masters and things like that, the other major championships, the PGA Championship, US Opens. You'll see some younger guys, some real studs winning. Here it's usually a bit different. You see your older guys like your Zach Johnsons and Darren Clarks of the world. So you can think about that a little bit. I'm not saying a young guy can't win because we saw Rory win here. It's not quite as likely to happen as the other majors because you really need to know how to play these link style English courses, and you're going to need to hit a lot of very strange shots into swirling winds and some tough approach shots and keep it on the fairway, which your younger guys usually tend to be more of your bombers, as where the older guys usually are your your Furyk type, keep it in the fairways, plunkers and plotters. And we see them do well at courses where they don't have to score a ton. They just have to hold tight, and that's what the old guys are good at doing. So we're going to look at old guys a little bit more this week, but we're not going to totally discount a lot of the young studs. It's just a lot of the young studs are set up for failure, just with their game and how it's set up to be mostly driving and not so much accuracy. So jumping into the top of the field, overall I don't really care about the top of the field, and this could honestly be a week where you leave a lot of money off the table, like up to $1,000, maybe even $2,000, just to be different, because the contests are so huge. And you're going to see a lot of people tying if you just use a bunch of chalk that fits together just right. But really, the top of the field is not very valuable. It's not like, you don't have your Jordan Spieths that are like 6-1, like you saw in the Masters. You get Dustin Johnson at 15-1, coming off of 2 straight missed cuts. And then Jordan Spieth, who is a better-looking option, but who's just still really bad off the tee. Even though he's coming off a win, he's only 15-1. And you also have Ricky Fowler, who is going to be the chalk of all chalk this week. At only $9,200, he's also 15-1 right now. We'll see how those trend coming to Thursday, but as of right now, you've got no clear favorite. You've got all the studs here, obviously. It's a very strong field. It's a major, but none of them are looking to be in like prime spots where they're unstoppable, like we've seen with guys like DJ, Spieth, and Day in the last few years. No one's really on a streak like that. And the nature of the event with the high variance and the weather and all that is going to wipe a lot of these guys out. And we've seen, guys like Rory, guys like Dustin Johnson missing cuts lately and just doing very poorly. We've seen Stenson do poorly all season until recently. And we've also seen Fleetwood miss all 3 of his cuts at the British Open. These guys up top, they're not safe by any means. And there's no real safe guy to pile onto like we had been used to doing with Dustin Johnson. So this week I encourage kind of foregoing a lot of these guys and not owning too much of one guy. Definitely hedge your ownership around like crazy. Don't get too invested in one guy, because even though Sergio has 3 straight top 6 finishes at British Opens and seems like an awesome play, hasn't missed a cut in forever, he could go out in the first hole and shoot like an 8 and be done right from there. You never know what's going to happen here, especially with aggressive guys. Your high salary guys are going to be more aggressive. You see some very aggressive players like Rahm, DJ, Sergio certainly, Jason Day. Some very, very aggressive guys who are going to have more unnecessary risk than some of your older guys, some of your mid-range, underpriced kind of guys, because there's a lot of value once you get into the 8 and 7K range, and certainly the 6K range. And another point I wanted to make about these expensive guys is that since there are so many cheap value plays this week that everyone's going to pile onto, people are going to play 3 studs in the 6K or 7K range, and then play 3 studs like up high, because they can very easily afford them. If you leave some salary on the table and kind of go a little bit lower, and play a lot more of those like mid-range guys, the 7 and 8K and 9K guys this week, I think that's going to be a strategy that makes you unique. Will keep you from ties in these huge contests, and will help you be contrarian and pivot and get low ownership, which is going to be oh so important in a week where variance is at its highest. Now, if I did have to pick a favorite of all of the studs, it would probably be both of the Spaniards. It really has to be. Jon Rahm won the Irish Open last time out, and he scored 160 DraftKings points. And while he did miss the cut at the U.S. Open, he's recovered since then with 2 very good European Tour finishes. He had finally made his way to the European Tour. I don't know why he didn't play in the Open de España, but he made it for the French and Irish Open. He's obviously really preparing for this Open Championship. I know it's hard to play a young guy like this, but he did make the cut here last year, or at the British Open last year. Not a great finish or anything, but he at least has that one little bit of experience there. And he's such a good scorer, such a talented young player. And of all the bombing studs up top, he has the best driving accuracy out of all of them. With Sergio right there underneath them having better driving accuracy than anyone out of the top tier range outside of Stenson, which obviously is his specialty. But Sergio and Rahm definitely looking like the best plays. Sergio pretty much always makes the cut at majors and posts tons and tons of top tens. He won his first major, the Masters, earlier this year, so he doesn't really have that stigma floating around him. He's been very, very good. Was good at the U.S. Open. Second at the BMW Internationals last time out in Europe. But I do suspect that Sergio is going to get a ton of ownership. Not quite as much as Ricky Fowler, who's going to be the chalk of all chalk. But I suspect that Sergio is going to get the second most because he hasn't missed a cut all season. We've seen that correlate with high ownership a lot this year. And so he's going to be a super common top option because he's safe. He's not in trouble like guys like Rory and Dustin Johnson with the missed cuts. Perfect all year. And his stats are really good too. His approach game is not the greatest and obviously is a bad putter. But he can scramble very well. Has a good driving distance and accuracy combo. And is very good at getting greens in regulation despite his struggles with strokes gained approach. And I think that's because he's very good at capitalizing on par fives. Right underneath Sergio and Rory there, we have Justin Rose at 10,300. He might also be a semi-popular play. He's also kind of safe-ish. He is from England, obviously, and he's an older guy. I like the play a lot. He's one of my favorite guys I'm going to be choosing. Probably one of the highest dollar guys outside of like Rahm and Sergio that I'm going to be going with quite a bit. Rose just seems like a really good play. I know his driving accuracy is not great, but he knows how to deal with these winds. He's basically an OG Englishman. Seems pretty safe to make the cut, but again, anything could happen. But I do like Rose. I think that Sergio is going to take a lot of his ownership, and maybe even Fleetwood around here. No one's going to take Jason Day. And yeah, his driving accuracy is just absolutely terrible. He's going to get in huge trouble. I don't see why you would take Jason Day. And then Tommy Fleetwood at 9,800, 8,100 on FanDuel. He's going to be chalk on both sites because he's coming off of 4 straight top 10 finishes, including a win at the French Open. And he finished 4th at the U.S. Open. Everyone saw him there. He's really been on a roll for a while, ever since he won back at Abu Dhabi. He's had a really good season. He's near the top. If you look at the European Tour website, he's at the top of mostly every statistical category, along with Sergio. And he's played a lot more tournaments than Sergio there. He says just great at greens and regulation. Based on the 3 tournaments that we have numbers for from his PGA Tour play this year, he has incredible driving accuracy, above average driving distance to go with it, and very, very, very good scrambling, with just all right approach and putting, and greens and regulation. His numbers on the PGA Tour aren't quite as good as on the European Tour, but we know long term that he's a very good guy at ball striking and getting the greens and regulations. So Fleetwood, he's just incredibly expensive on DraftKings, but he's still going to be a popular option just because people look at the game log and see 4 straight top 10 finishes. And then they listen to podcasts and watch videos and read articles that are all saying how this is his hometown, his home course. And yes, that is important, but he's a guy that could easily just blow up and finish T140 or something. I don't know why he's already almost 20-1 odds on American books, but it's a little bit crazy for someone who would be like 200-1 at this tournament last year. So you can basically decide with him. Don't think you're being sneaky, just because I think the word will definitely get out about Fleetwood. For $200 less, you can get the defending Open champion, an Open champion record holder, Henrik Stenson. He won a wild a wild duel last year with Phil Mickelson. They finished 10 strokes over the rest of the field. It was an incredible sight to watch. I remember watching it with my grandpa as a huge Phil Mickelson fan. Obviously, I'm a huge Henrik Stenson fan. It was absolutely enjoyable time. And boy, does Stenson just own the Open Championship. He has 4 top 3 finishes in the last 10 years. Finished 3rd here at this course back in 2008. I like that fact a lot. I like the defending champion. He's finally turned around his play. He had a terrible start to the season around the time of the Masters and the Players' Championship and all that, and Bay Hill, where he had some very disappointing missed cuts. Missed the cut at the U.S. Open, but outside of that, he's been very good at all his European Tour events, and he always is. And certainly at this tournament. So I love me some Henrik Stenson. I can finally get way back on board. You absolutely need driving accuracy. And who's been the driving accuracy champion for years on end now? It's been Henrik Stenson. And even in his struggles, he's maintained his driving accuracy and maintained his approach. His 3-wood is magical. He hits like 70+% of fairways. He's going to do spectacular here. I think that he will finally not be a low-owned option. I think he'll get some ownership here. I know that Fleetwood and Matsuyama and certainly Fowler will suck some away from him, but I think a lot of people will get back on him. I've heard a lot of talk about Stenson already. It's not just coming from me, so know that he's not going to be incredibly sneaky. He might be, though. I'm really hoping he is because he's my favorite play on the board. Hideki Matsuyama has much better Vegas odds than Stenson, and he's $100 cheaper at $9,500. He's 21-1 right now, looking like a pretty hot pick, second at the U.S. Open, and the one time since that we've seen him, finished top 15 at the Irish Open. So I think he's ready to go. He's always a very good ball striker, awesome scrambler, one of the best scramblers there is. So I like Hideki a lot. I think he's going to do well. He's done well at British Opens before, despite missing the cut last year. Not worried about Matsuyama whatsoever, and I'm going to be using him a lot to try and get off of the guy that's going to be very hard to get off of, the chalk of all chalk, Ricky Fowler, $9,200. It's just insane how he has the same odds as a guy who's $2,800 more expensive. That is just mind-boggling. But we have to take it at face value, so how are we going to deal with this Ricky situation? He's going to be possibly 40% owned. And honestly, are his chances of winning this thing that much better than, say, Brooks Koepka, $200 cheaper than him, who won the U.S. Open? I know it's hard to win 2 majors in a row, but if Koepka is going to be about 15% owned and Fowler's going to be 40% owned, does Fowler really have a 25% better chance than Koepka to do well? I don't really think so. I think he's going to be over-owned on both sites. I know he's more expensive on FanDuel, with 8 roster spots on FanDuel and everybody being able to spend up because of some of the absolutely ridiculous value on FanDuel this week. He's going to end up being super popular. So 40+% owned on both sites. I don't know if I can pull the trigger with that much ownership at a course where you can easily go down the drain. And we've seen Fowler go down the drain at majors before. We've seen him come pretty much last place at the U.S. Open. Places like that. We've seen him miss the cut here at this tournament before. Only once back in 2013. He followed that up with a runner-up, but everyone's going to be attracted to him. I know he has 4 top 10 finishes sandwiched around a missed cut at the St. Jude Classic. But maybe we'll see that St. Jude Classic kind of give up and go Ricky like we've seen in the past, or his blow-up rounds. We know we've seen that. It doesn't seem like he has a 40% chance of being in the winning lineup or being a top play. I don't think that's the case. Maybe more like a 20 to 30% chance. So maybe just go a little bit underweight on him. You can't fade him completely because his value is just ridiculous. But he's someone that I am looking to fade as much as I feel comfortable, and it's just hard to feel comfortable fading him a whole lot. After the Fowler and Koepka low end of the $9,000 range there, we dropped quite a bit to Phil Mickelson at $8,700, who still has yet to miss a cut this season, and is coming off the second place finish. We won back here in 2013. I do believe that was his last win. Also finished second back in 2011 and finished top 20 at this tournament at this course back in 2008. I think Mickelson's going to be popular just because, you know, the perfect cuts made that everyone's going to see now because it's right there on the both the DraftKings app and the website. They'll see it. It's like, you know, 14 for 14 cuts or whatever it is. They're going to see that. They're going to roster him. They're going to look at course history and go, oh yeah, want me some Phil. And they're going to hear that scrambling is important, and they're going to want to play Phil because everyone knows he's a great scrambler, but he's so bad off of the tee. He's just going to get himself into some huge trouble. You know that Phil's going to hit it into some crazy lie, and I don't think the magical shots are going to be there at such a awfully difficult course. I know he's an older guy. I know he's cash money at the Open Championship usually, but his Vegas odds are just extremely poor. 43-1 compared to Ricky Fowler's 15-1 at only $700 more. That's really hard to justify paying. I will play him on FanDuel. That's where I'll get my exposure to Phil, where he is only $7,600. That's a much better price. So that's the play with Phil, for sure. Just know he's going to be very chalky there, but I think it's fine to eat that chalk with 8 guys in your roster. But on DraftKings, Phil's not going to be terribly high owned because everyone is going to gravitate to Adam Scott at $8,500. He is probably the biggest value outside of Ricky Fowler. He's currently 28-1. Compare that to Phil Mickelson, who costs $200 more at 43-1. Scott's made 4 top 10s in his last 5 years and has made the last 7 cuts at the British Open. Pretty much always makes the cut here. He's been solid all season too. Did miss the cut at the U.S. Open, but he has not missed many cuts in the last 2 years. I think he's made over 90% of his cuts, if not 95% of his cuts. Just seems underpriced, and he will be popular, and the $8,500 mark is going to be absolutely perfect for people who want to play 2 studs up in the 10K, 11K range, then 3 value plays in the 6K to 7K range. That's going to be a very, very popular roster construction, and I think just people are going to see Scott there. He's pretty much on an island to where, you know, people aren't going to be too big on Koepka, Mickelson, or Peters, Oosthuizen, Thomas. Maybe a little on Oosthuizen, but he's just a bit spaced out on a salary island there with the $200 gap between him and Phil. And Phil himself is also on a huge salary island with $300 between him and Koepka and $200 between him and Scott. So it's also going to lead to him getting a little bit more ownership than you would guess originally just because of where he's at. But I think a lot of those shares are going to go to Scott, and he's going to push 30% owned, probably break that number. So be aware of that with Scott, but he does seem like a really safe pick. Pretty much a lock on FanDuel, because you don't have to worry about chalk quite as much on FanDuel. So you can go ahead and eat the chalk there. Thomas Peters at $8,400 is a very interesting name. I know he missed the cut at the U.S. Open, but he almost won the Masters. Like, he was leading multiple rounds of the Masters. We've seen him be wicked off the tee, according to European Tour stats. The PGA Tour stats don't really mimic that, but we only have 2 tournaments to go off of. But in those 2 tournaments, his strokes gained approach number and his greens regulation numbers are just insane. They're very good, along with his putting. But he's about 50-1. Compare that to Adam Scott's 28-1. It's just hard to even consider playing him over Scott. That's what makes it so tough. So Peters is someone I was on. He's just very overpriced. I can't really afford to play him. Maybe if him and Noren switch places, which they probably should, just going by world golf rankings and stuff like that. But Peters just too expensive here. Louis Oosthuizen is someone who's pretty much safe to make the cut. Great cash game play. You always see him do very well in majors. He missed the cut here last year, but in 2015, I finished second, won the British Open back in 2010. He's won the Masters. I mean, Louis Oosthuizen is just a guy who shows up for very strong field events and does well. You can pretty much lock in a top 30 from him. So maybe play him in cash and then use him sparingly in GPP or just go in on both. But Louis Oosthuizen seems like a good play, and I don't think he's going to be overwhelmingly owned, although he will be a little bit higher owned because of his perfect cut marks on the year. But he's just not a guy I see being the chalk. I think that people aren't going to go to the low 8K range for anybody, just based on how Scott's right there and how people are gonna either just go Scott or go Casey at 8,100. Between Casey and Oosthuizen, we have Justin Thomas, who I'd like to talk about real quick, just because I'm 100% not on him. He's like the king of blow up holes and blow up rounds. You see it all the time out of him. I know his strokes gained approach numbers are pretty good, but I can't buy him here. I need him at a scoring tournament where guys are going to need to score like a minus 20. At a tournament like this is just absolutely not where you want to use Justin Thomas. So on to Paul Casey, 8,100. I think he's also going to be very popular. Probably over 25% owned, maybe pushing 30%. He's been very, very good. We last saw him at the Travelers Championship, finishing 5th. He's been on a tear all season long and has slowly gotten better and better and better. He's only $8,100, but his odds are 30-1 compared to guys like Justin Thomas and Brennan Grace and Oosthuizen and Peters, who are around 50-1. So he's going to be just obvious value in this range. Everyone's going to take him. Lock him in cash. He looks like a very good cash gameplay. He is an older Englishman, not like too old, but middle-aged Englishman. I do like Casey a lot, and that's one of the chalks I'm gonna eat on FanDuel, where he's only 7,800, and even on DraftKings. I do like using Casey quite a bit. So we head into the under $8,000 range. I do like Brendan Grace right at $8,000. He has a very low ball flight. And still maintains a very good approach stat, which is kind of a bit uncommon. He's been making cuts, was just 15th at the Scottish Open. He hasn't looked quite as good as he has years past, but he's made 6 of 6 cuts at the British Open. Obviously, he's going to know how to work these wins masterfully. If the weather picks up, I'm going to like guys like Grace a bit more. And maybe even Tyrrell Hatton. I know he's been garbage. He's missed 4 cuts in a row now. But I think... I don't know. I think that he's going to be just so ridiculously low owned at almost 90-1 odds, $8,000, compared to Paul Casey's 35-1 odds at 8,100. No one's going to own him, but I don't think it's worth just making a bad play like that. I don't know. I would just own like one very tiny share of him just in case. I mean, he finished top 5 here last year. It's just, I don't know, it just seems like a course that he would fit at, like, statistically, because he's just so good at, like, scrambling and stuff like that, usually on the European tour. But I don't know. It's hard to really justify a play like that unless you know for a fact that he's going to be 1% owned or 1.5% owned or something. But unless you can guarantee that, it's not really worth making the play. Shane Lowry's another, he's an Irish guy, but he's going to know how to work these wins, obviously. The wins are from the Sea of Ireland. So I do like Lowry a lot for that. I like him on FanDuel at $7,400. Not too huge on Patrick Reed. He had a missed cut that kind of broke his little streak he went on there of 4 straight top 20 finishes. That was at the Scottish Open, so it was the one European Tour event he went on. This is a little bit concerning, I guess, and I'm not really on Reed at a tournament like this where you have to have driving accuracy, because he doesn't have very much at all. And a play I do like a whole lot. Remember I said earlier that Noren and Peters should have had their prices swapped. Noren's quite cheap at $7,800. Even $8,000 on FanDuel is fine. His odds are very good, around 40-1, and he's won on the European Tour 5 times in the last year. He has a nose for finishing in first. He just won last at the BMW PGA Championship, which was a very strong field. So I know he just missed the cut at the Scottish Open, but he's someone who posts a ridiculous amount of top 10s, and here in Europe, he's going to be certainly someone to look at, and I don't think his ownership will be that crazy. with him coming off of the miscut at the Scottish Open, but I think he's going to be a very strong play. So I like him a lot. Mark Leishman, also at 7,800. I like him even more. He's going to be more popular, but his form is just ridiculously consistent. And that's what we've always seen out of Mark Leishman as well. And he's done very well at British Opens in the past. Finished top 5 in 2014. Then went to a playoff with Zach Johnson and Louis Oosthuizen back in 2015 and almost won. Made the cut last year. Mark Leishman is a very solid cash play. Probably the first name I'd look to outside of maybe Kuchar. And in GPP, I don't think he's going to be high enough owned to make him a fade because of all the value around him and because he's in the higher $7,000 range, and I don't think people are going to be able to afford that with the way they're going to want to play these studs up top. So the lower 7K range and 6K range is going to be more popular this week. I think Leishman stays under 20% owned and makes for a really good play to have a huge chunk of. I also like Lee Westwood at 7,700 just because he always shows up in the majors. He's just like Louis Oosthuizen in that regard. And he has 3 top 3 finishes in the last 8 years at the Open Championship. Martin Keimer has kind of fallen into hard times, but he's certainly someone that's always struck out of nowhere with his wins. And I'm sure that people are off of him with his recent finishes, and he's going to be very low owned. And that might be a mistake because he's someone who can absolutely win this thing. And right underneath him, you've got one of my favorite plays I've been a little vocal about, although Vegas seems to hate him at almost 120 to 1. And maybe it's because of some bad quote-unquote course history, but Bernd Wiesberger at $7,600. Perfect on the year for cuts, so he's going to get some ownership. People are kind of talking about him a little bit, and anyone that's played Euro Tour golf on the season knows that Wiesberger is always one of the top options, and he's pretty solid to make the cut. He actually just had his worst finish on the entire season, T51 at the Scottish Open, but before that he was pretty much a top 30 lock. I think he had like 7 out of 8 tournaments. He had a top 30 finish. Won at the Shenzhen Open. Has several wins over the last few years on the European Tour. He's probably one of the 3 best players on the European Tour. And he's never been that great when he comes to America and plays, but this is in Europe. He absolutely knows how to work all of the courses here and whatnot. He's been absolutely excellent and consistent over the last few years in Europe, so Wiesberger is going to be a guy that I am extremely heavy on. We have 3 tournaments of data for him from the PGA Tour, and his numbers are absolutely excellent. Very excellent driving accuracy, and his strokes gained approach is one of the best in the field too. And his driving distance is also well above average, along with his greens and regulations. So the only struggle he has is he's not a very good putter, but at a week like this, it could be a bit normalized to focus more on tee to green than putting because of all the wind conditions and all that. And he knows how to work that. And at the same price as Byrne, another play that I like is Zach Johnson, the winner here in 2015. And he actually has 5 top 16 finishes in the last 5 years and has made the cut pretty much every single year. He's almost a lock to make the cut here. That his entire game has always been about ball striking, driving accuracy, strokes gained approach. And he's coming off of a great finish at, of course, a course where his course history is better than anyone's course history anywhere. But there's nothing like a good top 5 finish to get you back in the groove. I think he's going to be a very strong pick. And he has a very low ball flight. He's going to know how to... he's an older guy. He's going to know how to work all these different shots. I know he's an American player, but I think he can absolutely excel at a tournament like this, and he has in the past. He made the cut here back in 2008. I think he's a very safe cash game option, maybe even safer than Wiesberger, just because he has the history of struggles at the British Open. But Zach Johnson, a very strong play. But Vegas prefers Ian Poulter at 7,500. He's had a really up and down history, but he finished second here at this course in 2008. has a few other top tens, but lots of missed cuts at the British Open. He's been playing better. He had that second place finish a few months back and then finished top 10 at the Scottish Open. He's an Englishman, and he's an older Englishman. He's going to know how to get it done. His strokes gained approach, and certainly his strokes gained around the green game, very strong. He's always been kind of an accuracy guy. He's going to be someone you're going to want some ownership of. And just going down into these lower 7K guys, there are a few guys really stick out. Francesco Molinari at 7,300. He has a very, very good track record at the British Open, and he's been statistically one of the best, if not the best, at ball striking, driving accuracy, and greens and regulation, and strokes gained approach. His numbers are just off the charts. And it's with a huge sample size, a sample size of 10 tournaments. So you can see in 10 tournaments, he has averaged 1.5 standard deviations better than the average player in the field at any given field in driving accuracy, and 1.1 in strokes gained approach too, which is just an absolutely astonishing number. And his numbers are also very good for greens regulation and strokes gained off the tee. He's actually been putting poorly, but if you think very long term, he's actually one of the better putters on the European Tour. He knows how to work these links courses, and what I say about a lot of the other European Tour guys, but he's someone that I'm going to be on a lot. Along with Charles Schwartzel, he's also always been a very good approach guy. His numbers are not good this year. Outside of his second place finish at the St. Jude, he hasn't done a whole lot, but he's very good at the British Open in general. He's an older guy, a veteran, and he's going to have very low ownership because I think all the ownership here is going to go to either Molinari, Kuchar, or Harrington, or Griot. And getting into those guys real fast. Matt Kuchar, on a roll, just on a tear really. Just his form is absolutely excellent. 4th at the Scottish Open, and pretty much always makes the cut at the British Open. His odds are 50-1, so comparable to guys in the low $9,000 range, which is crazy. And as is usual at major tournaments, Matt Kuchar is going to be the chalk. At 7,200 and 7,500 on FanDuel, he's going to be the chalk for sure. At the same price, you have the guy who won here in 2008 and has posted 4 straight very good finishes, along with that T4 last week at the Scottish Open, Padraig Harrington. His odds are 60-1. He's 7,200, and he's looking like an alright play. He's coming to form a lot. He won at the Portugal Classic, or the Portugal Masters, a while back during the swing season. But, I mean, it shows that he can still win. And he's always been better on the European Tour than the PGA Tour, at least recently. And it's looked like he's gotten his form in check. He even finished top 20 at the Travelers Championship over on the PGA Tour. So Harrington's someone who's coming in a little hot. I expect him to be one of the highest drifters. I'll update the odds drifts as usual on Wednesday night. And I bet he's going to be one of the players that drifts. I think he's going to drift up to about 50-1. He's going to be bet up because everyone's going to realize, oh, hey, he won this tournament at this course, and it was by 4 strokes. So you got to consider him a favorite right now. Well, not a favorite, but you got to consider him a strong play, and an ultra strong play on FanDuel where he's only $5,600. Almost a free spot there. Another good play here, Andy Sullivan at $7,000. He's on a tear, only plays on the European Tour, but his form is quite excellent. Top 10 at the Scottish Open, several made cuts in a row, and in 2 years of playing the Open Championship, he has 2 top 30 finishes. So he's going to be someone to consider mightily. Russell Henley at $7,000, a little cheap. This is where you're going to find a lot of these PGA Tour players that you go like, whoa, what is he doing at that price? But historically, PGA players have struggled, especially younger players, at these British Open, because it's just not what they're used to. But Henley does seem a little bit cheap. Thorborn Olesen, who just won the Scottish Open, he's at $7,000, along with Jimmy Walker, who had been playing a little bit better, but is still just a little shaky, and I don't see him winning here. Steve Stricker is going to be a very good play at $6,900. Always makes the cut at the Open Championship. Just finished 5th at the John Deere, where he always finishes like top 10. He had won there 3 years in a row at one point. But he's been excellent this season, only missing one cut. And if you think about it, he's perfect for the course. Low ball flight, awesome driving accuracy. This year he has boasted an excellent strokes gained approach stat, along with his typical putting and all that. But he's also been very good around the greens. He looks like someone who's going to be able to manage. He's like the old dude plunker, since Furyk isn't in the event. I think he's in the Barbasol tournament this week, actually. But Steve Stricker, 6,900. I think he's going to be a little popular. And he's pretty much what you're looking for this week. And the European version of Steve Stricker, even shorter off the tee, but just as good as accuracy and all that, just not quite as good at strokes gained approach. That would be Soren Keldsen at 6,900 as well. And he had just finished top 10 at the Scottish Open. Now, in this upper $6,000 range, not a lot of these guys are going to be high owned because there are just so many plays crammed in this spot. We saw the same thing at the US Open and at the Masters. So it's business as usual for a very, very soft field, but all of these guys are just excellent plays. Brandt Snedeker at 6,800. He's very underpriced, like ridiculously underpriced. So definitely play him. Chris Wood at 6,800. He finished 5th here in 2008 and has always been a good at the British Open. Just he's missed 3 cuts in a row, but before that he had some top 5 finishes on the European Tour. So he can certainly turn it around at a course where he's done well at before. Peter Uihlein, one of the best in scoring average on the European Tour. He's been a solid cut maker all season long with some very high finishes on both the European and the PGA Tour. Someone to watch out for there. Webb Simpson, who had been getting a little hot in the PGA Tour, he's 6,800. His approach and driving accuracy game fits the course quite a bit, and he can scramble also. He just can't putt. A few other everyday names that everybody likes, like Tony Finau, who we saw be the chalk of all chalk back during the Greenbrier Classic. He's going to be popular once again this week, but I don't think he fits the course that well. He did finish top 20 last year at the British Open, and is quite good at the par 3 range of 175 to 200 yards. I just think he's gonna bomb it and get into trouble. Very high ball flight and stuff like that. But you never know. I mean, he's just playing well. Martin Laird, who's a Scottish guy, we saw him come third at the Quicken Loans, but then follow that up with a bad showing at the Scottish Open, which is kind of worrying because he is Scottish. But it does take some getting used to because he had been exclusively on the PGA Tour for a while. Maybe he could turn it around, but I wouldn't be too into him. Adam Hadwin is 200 to 1, which is kind of weird when you think about how good he was doing earlier in the season. But his last 4 finishes, 2 missed cuts, and 2 finishes on the very low end of the weekend. So he's not in the greatest form. Gary Woodland is someone who's made 5 of 5 cuts at the British Open, finishing 12th last year, and has made almost every cut this year. So at 6,800, he might be a nice little play. And the winner of the Scottish Open, Rafael Cabrera Bello. He's a guy who's always very good on the European Tour. Has a low ball flight, great at hitting greens, great at driving accuracy. That's always been his game. Hasn't quite showed on the PGA Tour this season. He's had some struggles, but he's a real GPP play. Like, he's either a big hit or a big miss. Also at 6,700, a play that's going to be super popular this week, Daniel Berger, who we saw finish 5th last week at the John Deere Classic. He'd won at St. Jude, and then followed it up with a missed cut at the US Open, but then immediately turned it around with a second-place finish at the Travelers Championship. I think Berger's going to be super popular. And I also think Ross Fisher is going to be popular. He's a well-known European Tour name, and at 6,700, he's just well underpriced. He's been playing very, very good recently. And then Kevin Kisner, 6,700, he's also going to be quite popular, as he's a very known commodity, very high fantasy points per game kind of guy, and his game is very well suited for this course as well. Great at accuracy, great at greens and regulation. Approach is all right, but it's a scrambling that's very good. So Kisner's going to be a strong play. Byung-Hun An, I don't think his course fit is that great. I don't think his game fit is that good, but he's made cut after cut after cut after cut on the season that's going to make him popular. A play I like a ton is Just Luiten. Just Luiten, $6,700, but I love him even more on FanDuel where he's $5,200. He is going to be just an excellent play. $6,700. He's really one of the better European Tour players from year to year. He's pretty much always up there, always making cuts, always a threat to win. He's been doing this for quite a while. He's probably one of the 10 best European Tour players, if not one of the top 5. So I love Luiten a lot. Certainly on FanDuel, he's almost a free space. He has a very, very good chance of making the cut here. And then Charlie Hoffman and last week's winner Bryson DeChambeau, and also Kevin Chappell, and then a guy who we had been seeing doing excellently in the European Tour until some recent miscuts, including a win at the Lioness tournament, is Dylan Fratelli, who's also $5,200 on FanDuel. There are a lot of crazy values on FanDuel this week, and that's one of them. But when you look into the $6,000 range in FanDuel, you'll see some well-known guys that are going to be very popular. So people aren't going to make it into the 5K range, but there are some really, really good plays down there. Like Wesley Bryan, saw him finish 3rd last week with an absolutely excellent approach game. Probably one of the top 3 in the field in approach is Wesley Bryan, and he is $5,200 on FanDuel, $6,600 on DraftKings. Then Charles Howell III, same price on both sites. Just absolutely ridiculous pricing on him. And then an interesting name, also the same price on both sites, $6,600 and $5,200, Ryan Fox, who has 3 straight top 6 finishes and 6 straight made cuts on the European Tour. I don't think he fits the course that great because he is a long bomber. He's one of the longest bombers in the world, really. Hits it almost as long as Dustin Johnson does. Then, lastly, at the bottom of the field here, you have a ton of kind of scrubby guys. I do like Pablo Larrazabal a lot at $6,600, $5,100 on FanDuel. He was a guy you saw almost win at Abu Dhabi, very strong field there, and really was a top 20 guy all season long until a couple of missed cuts recently. But he's super undervalued, especially on FanDuel. You want to play him there. Xander Schauffele, who just saw a win at the Greenbrier, has had 4 absolutely amazing finishes in a row, including a 5th at the U.S. Open at $6,500 on DraftKings and $5,600 on FanDuel. It's a pretty strong play, but he is a very young guy, and he's quite the bomber. So that is a concern there. Kevin Na had been playing a little bit better, and he's still cheap down here at $6,500. He kind of has the game that you want here. And then going down a little bit lower, it's hard to justify any of these guys. Jamie Lovemark might get popular because he's been playing a lot better recently. A name that I like a lot is Hao Tong Lee, $6,400 on DraftKings, $5,200 on FanDuel. He won at the Nordea Masters. Followed that up with a 7th place finish at the French Open. Is probably almost a top 10 guy in Europe. Probably right at the bottom end of the top 10. But he's a very consistent, steady golfer, and no one likes to pick Asian names. So Hao Tong Lee at $6,400, $5,200 on FanDuel. Very good play there. And another secret weapon kind of play down this range, it's going to be 1% owned, is Alexander Bjork. He has a very, very solid long-term history with the European Tour. He's, the constant, not like a stud, but just a solid cut maker. Year after year, really, with him. He's kind of younger, but at only $5,000 on FanDuel, that's a very good play. $6,400 on DraftKings. And then at almost minimum price on FanDuel, Michael Lorenzo Vera is $4,600. He'd been very good on the European Tour until the last few weeks where he's had some missed cuts, but at this tournament where anyone can win, why not take the $4,600 guy that's known how to get it done? And then 2009's winner of the Open Championship, Stuart Sink, who's been excellent this year, has been a top 30 machine. Just because he missed the cut at the Scottish Open. He's dropped all the way to $6,300, $5,500 on FanDuel, and that's crazy cheap for him. We've seen him win. The last time that he's played the British Open, he finished 20th back in 2015. Makes the cut most years. He's been a cut-making machine this year, at least on the PGA Tour. So I like Stewart Cink a lot. I think of all the super cheap guys, he'll probably be the highest owned. It probably won't even be that high. Richard Bland at $6,300 and $4,900 on FanDuel is a very good play. He had always been like if you play European Tour golf, he was always like a super highly owned option. He'd be like 40% every week, even in the $9,000-$10,000 range. He was very good. He just had some miscuts, kind of a streak that lost him into obscurity. But he finished second at the BMW International tournament just a few weeks ago, and then 19th at the Scottish Open. I think he's going to be an awesome, sneaky, under-the-radar guy, because he's an older English guy who absolutely knows how to get it done. He's going to be a very sharp play. After that, it pretty much goes to all just actual scrubs. No one even really worth mentioning. Got like old guys that have won the British Open before and stuff like that. So that pretty much goes over the entire field there. Just remember to write down what all plays you like and try to play as many of them as you can. Hedge as much as you can. If you're using the domination station this week, you can adjust the new min and max exposure percentages, which is pretty cool. I like that update to the domination station a lot. I'd set your max exposure down at like 30% this week. Maybe make a manual exception for a few guys, or even down at 25%, even 20%. I just get a crazy hedge going around. Maybe you can do that, set it at 20%, and just manually set it above 20% for a few of your favorite guys. And make sure you get their min exposure in there. And that'd be a pretty good way to run the domination station this week. I'd certainly start every lineup if you're hand making them. I'd start with thinking Fowler or no Fowler. And that's pretty much going to be the tune this week, because, I mean, statistically, Fowler's like perfect for the course, has the best adjusted stroke average, great at the key range and everything, has all the top 10 finishes in the world, great course history, just everything's going for Fowler. It's simply a choice of, do you want to pay the chalk or do you want to fade the chalk? It's all up to you. So I'll see you guys next week. Wish you very good luck at the British Open. Hope someone can take down one of these huge tournaments that they have for the week, especially that Millionaire Maker. So best of luck to you guys. I'll see you next week. If you want to come check out our premium product, please check us out at dfsarmy.com. Click the link in the description of iTunes or the YouTube, and be sure to check us out and use promo code TACO if you want to give us a look. So thank you very much, and I will see you guys next week. Peace out.
Thank you for listening to the DFS Army podcast. Join the DFS Army today and gain access to our private Slack chat, where you can chat with real DFS pros and coaches, as well as other DFS Army members with winning track records. Also included in your membership is access to our premium articles, DFS Army weighted projections for every sport we offer, from NFL to MMA, weekly player picks and cheat sheets, the strategy vault of timeless concepts, and the DFS Army Domination Station, a truly state-of-the-art lineup optimizer, offering your personal projections or ours. The DFS Army membership is the best value across the industry. Join today and get 2 free ebooks, as well as the secrets to unlocking a new level to your game.